Obama's talking about all of this with the global warming and that, and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay?
I'm not a believer in global warming. I'm not a believer in man-made global warming. I believe there's weather. I believe there's change, and I believe it goes up, and it goes down, and it goes up again. But I am not a believer, and we have much bigger problems.
There was President Trump during the presidential campaign, setting the stage for that dramatic decision this week to exit the Paris Climate Accords. And we're joined now by one of his top advisors on that, the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt. Mr. Pruitt, thank you for joining us this morning. So we just played those clips from the president back in 2015 during the campaign. Is it fair to assume that is still the president's belief?
I think the president made it clear in that statement that the climate changes. And I think what needs to be emphasized here, George, is that our focus with respect to the Paris Accord was about the agreement, the efficacy of the agreement as it relates to the environment, how it impacts the economy. The president said on Thursday that engagement internationally is something that's going to continue. But what Paris represents is a bad deal for this country, and as such, we need to exit.
But doesn't it matter whether or not the president believes there's man-made climate change, whether he believes it's a hoax? That's the predicate for the entire decision.
With respect to the Paris Accord, the focus is on the efficacy, the merits of the deal, and the demerits of the deal. The president indicated very clearly that engagement by this country internationally is going to continue. As you know, George, we are part of the UNFCCC. That's a treaty that was ratified in the early 1990s. We have shown leadership, actually substantial leadership as a country with respect to our CO2 reductions. We're at pre-1994 levels today with respect to our CO2 reductions. In fact, we're there before the Paris Accord was ever executed by this country. And when you look at the years from 2000 to 2014, we reduced CO2 emissions by over 18%. So we're leading by example. I mean, as I indicated late last week, and as the president indicated in his speech as well, we are leading with action, not words. And when you look at Paris, frankly, when you look at what was supposed to be achieved there by other nations across the globe, it was very little. It was criticized by the environmental left. The head of James Hansen, who was a NASA scientist, called it a fake and a fraud.
But, sir, it's a pretty simple question. Why can't the president just say whether or not he believes in man-made climate change? You speak for the president. You're the EPA administrator. Do you know what the president believes?
Well, frankly, George, I think the whole question is an effort to get it off the point and the issue of whether Paris was good for this country or not. And the president has indicated the climate changes.
Well, a lot of that depends on whether or not climate change is man-made.
But, George, what matters is what you do about it. What matters is what steps you take to address CO2 reductions. And what matters when you look at Paris is that China and India didn't take any steps while this country did. And the environmental left has a very short memory. When Paris was executed by this country, they criticized the agreement. It said that it did not hold China and India accountable. And at the same time, we're reducing our CO2 footprint substantially.
I want to move on, but just very simply, do you know if President Trump still believes that climate change is a hoax?
Our discussion, George, has been about the agreement, the efficacy of the agreement. That's where we spent the last several weeks, focused upon the merits and demerits of the Paris Agreement. He put America first. He said that he's going to put jobs and the environment first, by the way, by making the decision that he said on Thursday.
As you know, you've received a lot of backlash from the business community. 25 businesses signed a letter to the president saying this is not going to be good for the economy. Here's what they wrote. They say, by expanding markets for innovative, clean technologies, the agreement generates jobs and economic growth. U.S. companies are well positioned to lead in these markets. Withdrawing from the agreement will limit our access to them and could expose us to retaliatory measures. They believe it's going to be bad for the economy to pull out.
Well, when you look at even the New York Times had an article, I think, within the last couple of days that talked about small business celebrating euphoria with respect to the president's decision. I mean, it's very speculative, in my estimation, George, for those multinational companies to say this is going to somehow impact the exporting of green technology across the globe. What we do know objectively is that the Paris Agreement represented a $2.5 trillion reduction in our gross domestic product over 10 years. What we do know is that it impacted up to 400,000 jobs as well. And so this was something that was bad for our economy. It just makes common sense that when you take energy sector jobs and say we're no longer produce energy in those sectors, that it's going to impact the manufacturing base and the energy jobs in this country. We've had over 50,000 jobs since last quarter, coal jobs, mining jobs created in this country. We had almost 7,000 mining and coal jobs created in the month of May alone. The unemployment rate is 4.3%, as you know, George. This president's deregulation agenda, particularly in the energy space, is making a substantial impact on the jobs across this country and giving people hope. And I will say this to you. It's also rejecting the previous administration's view that you can't grow jobs and protect the environment because, as I indicated earlier, we've reduced our CO2 footprint with action from 2000 to 2014 by over 18% through innovation and technology.
The President also, in the Rose Garden on Thursday, suggested that we could go farther in reducing carbon emissions. Here's what he had to say about the agreement.
It is estimated it would only produce a 0.2 of 1 degree. Think of that. This much Celsius reduction in global temperature by the year 2100. Tiny, tiny amount.
The authors of the study the president cited from MIT dispute his interpretation there, but I want to go take it to a different step. Is the president actually saying that he wants to get more carbon reduction than is called for in the agreement?
George, I think what he's saying is that the cost that was going to be borne by this country over, as I indicated, $2.5 trillion of gross domestic product over 10 years for a reduction of less than 0.2 of 1 degree by the year 2100 is just simply a bad deal for this country. There were other studies, by the way. I know that the MIT study is something that people are pointing to, that person's changed their view. There was the global policy publication that came out at the same time, near the same time. You had the Heritage and NERO studies that focused on the economic impacts. I mean, what we do know is this. We know that the environmental left was as critical of Paris as those on the right were as far as it violating process and the cost that was going to be borne by this country. They thought it was a bad deal. As I indicated earlier, James Hansen called it a fake and a fraud. So there's very much short memory being applied here with respect to the efficacy of environmental protection coming out of Paris.
Mr. Pruitt, thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you.